You're walking down the street, headphones in, music playing. To anyone passing by, you just look like someone enjoying a playlist, but you're not actually listening to the music. Not really. The music is just the soundtrack to a movie playing inside your head. You've been listening to this same 5-minute song on repeat for an hour because it perfectly scores the climax of your scenario you've been building all day. You're not walking to the store. You're walking toward a life-changing confrontation. You're practicing your facial expressions, whispering the perfect, devastating comeback, fine-tuning the dialogue to a person who isn't even there. And then, someone waves at you, or a car honks, and you snap back. You feel that sudden, cold hangover of embarrassment. You realize you've been pacing or walking for miles, and you have no idea where the time went. If you've ever felt that your imaginary scenarios are more emotionally exhausting than your real life, if you felt that your mental movies are more vivid than your actual memories, you aren't weird, and you definitely aren't alone. This is a specific psychological phenomenon called maladaptive daydreaming. It affects about 2.5% of the population, millions of people who are living double lives. One life is messy, quiet, and unpredictable. The other is perfect, controlled, and intensely cinematic. So, why do you do this? Why do you have to walk? Why do you need the music? Here is the secret. Your brain is trying to bridge the gap between fiction and reality. Neuroscientists have found that physical movement, like that pacing or rhythmic walking, activates your sensory cortex. By moving your body while imagining, you are tricking your nervous system into believing the scenario is actually physically happening. The music acts as a neural anchor. It provides the emotional vibe that your real life is currently missing. You aren't addicted to the music itself. You're addicted to the dopamine music loop. The song triggers the emotion fuels the scenario, and the scenario provides the escape. But there's a cost to this invisible acting. You're using 90% of your brain's processing power to maintain a world that doesn't exist, which is why when you finally take the headphones out, the world feels gray. It feels slow. It feels disappointing. You've spent so much energy in the simulation that reality feels like a letdown. You're not just daydreaming, you're running a flight simulator for a life you're too exhausted to actually live. But your brain isn't just imagining random nonsense. If you look closely at your movie library, you'll notice your scenarios usually fall into one of 3 addiction archetypes. 1. The Vindication loop. This is the one where you finally win an argument. You're back in that room from 3 years ago, or you're in a future boardroom, and you are delivering the most articulate, crushing speech ever written. The science is this. Your brain is trying to solve unresolved powerlessness. You felt small in reality, so your brain is overclocking your imagination to give your nervous system the feeling of victory it never got. 2. The protagonist fantasy. In this one, you're famous, you're the best in your field. Or you're the tragic hero everyone finally realizes they underestimated. The science? This is a dopamine substitute. If your real life feels stagnant or your hard work isn't being recognized yet, your brain manufactures artificial success to keep your dopamine levels from crashing. It's a survival mechanism for a mind that feels underutilized. 3. The Idealized Connection. In this one, you're having deep, soulful conversations with someone you barely know, or someone who isn't even in your life anymore. In this case, your brain is filling a social complexity gap. Humans are wired for complex tribal interaction. If your real-world social life is thin or surface level, your brain builds complex NPCs, non-player characters, to satisfy its biological need for connection. Do you recognize yours? Maybe you alternate between all 3. But here is the dangerous truth. The more perfect these simulated people become, the more disappointing real people start to feel. You're setting a standard in your head that reality can never meet. To understand why your brain prefers a fake scenario over a real conversation, we have to look at your default mode network, DMN. In a typical brain, you have a toggle switch. When you're working, your task-positive network is on. When you rest, your default mode network kicks in. This is where you dream, remember, and imagine. But for a maladaptive daydreamer, that toggle switch is jammed. Your brain is a prediction machine. Its job is to run flight simulators. A pilot uses a simulator to practice a crash landing so they don't die in real life. That's adaptive simulation. It's useful, but your brain discovered a dopamine leak in the simulator. When you imagine finally being successful or finally being the hero who saves the day, your brain releases a hit of dopamine. To your nervous system, the imagined emotional win feels almost identical to a real one. So your brain made a cold, survival-based calculation. Why should I risk the messy, unpredictable pain of a real-world conversation when I can get the same chemical reward in a controlled, perfect simulation with zero risk? You aren't lazy. You've just accidentally trained your brain to prefer the simulation over the flight. And once that loop starts, it becomes a process addiction. You aren't addicted to the story. You're addicted to the feeling of control that the story gives you. The reason you feel so tired at the end of the day, even if you've done nothing, is because your brain doesn't know the difference between a real emotion and a simulated one. When you get angry in a fake argument, your body releases real cortisol. Your heart rate actually spikes. When you feel heartbreak in a scenario, your nervous system processes real grief. You are literally exhausting your emotional bandwidth on characters that don't exist. This is why you have no energy for your real job, your real partner, or your real goals. You've already spent your day's energy in the simulator. So, how do you turn the simulator off? How do you take a brain that has been self-medicating with fantasy for years and bring it back to the real world? You don't do it by shaming yourself. You do it by updating your brain's operating system. Here is the reality calibration protocol. 1. The externalization technique, closing the open tabs. Your brain keeps these scenarios on a loop because it feels like unfinished business. It's a psychological effect called the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones. The next time you're stuck in a vindication loop, stop and write it down. Every word of that perfect comeback, every detail of that confrontation. When you move a scenario from your internal simulation to an external artifact, your brain's processing shifts. It moves from active loop to stored data. You are essentially telling your brain, I've recorded this, you can stop simulating it now. 2. The sensory interrupt. Remember what we said about your sensory cortex? We can use that same biology to snap you out of a trance. When you notice the pacing or the invisible acting, you need a high-intensity sensory input. Hold an ice cube until it stings. Smell a strong essential oil. Or use the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding method. Name 5 things you see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. By forcing your brain to process intense, real-world physical data, you are physically starving the simulation of the energy it needs to continue. 3. The reality test. You need to train your brain to distinguish between preparation and protection. Ask yourself one brutal question. Is this scenario preparing me for an action I will actually take in the next 48 hours? If you're rehearsing a job interview you have tomorrow, that's adaptive. If you're rehearsing an argument with an ex from 5 years ago, that's protection. If there is no real-world action attached, label it for what it is, a ghost flight. Recognize it, label it, and pivot back to the task in front of you. Your imagination isn't the enemy. It's a superpower that's currently running without a pilot. You've spent years in the simulator because, at some point, the real world felt unsafe, or boring, or quiet. Your brain did what it had to do to protect you. It built a palace when the real world felt like a cage. But you don't have to live in the palace anymore. The real flights, the messy, unscripted, unpredictable conversations, are the only ones that actually land you somewhere new. Real growth doesn't happen in the simulation. It happens in the gray world that you've been trying to escape. Because the more you show up for reality, the less gray it starts to look. I'll be sharing more videos like this on psychology and self-understanding. Subscribe if this content resonates with you.